So Nintendo had a very successful financial report. They've announced that they've sold like 15 million Switch 2s, like 17 million shipped to retailers, and people are coping about this. They're trying to like come to any kind of conclusion they can to downplay the console and its success, but it's not really working. Like the momentum behind this thing is pretty strong. Everyone's like trying to fall behind like all sorts of copes, like, well, it's not selling as well in America. They're trying to bitch about Western games and Western developers and like partner directs and all that. But the simple fact of the matter is that the Switch 2 is very, very successful. And it's been very, very difficult to downplay it. And as a result of that, more and more we're starting to see YouTubers who don't know what they're talking about, like point to the stock market as like an indication of how badly Nintendo is doing. Oh, look at this. They dropped 10% after releasing the financial reports. That must mean investors are pulling out. Yeah, hey, genius. It's very common for investors to pull out to pull out after financial reports because they are reinvesting in other things. They invest in Nintendo when like products are announced and like big things are coming, but after the big things are here, after the Nintendo Switch 2 is here, like yeah, they are going to sell their shares and like move on to something else. This isn't abnormal. This isn't unusual. It's a very typical like stockholder like strategy. Like there's nothing really all that unusual about it. And the simple fact of the matter is that the stock market fluctuates all the time for all sorts of reasons, and yet you have people who don't really know what they're talking about, like making all these like ludicrous claims, like, oh yeah, Switch 2 33% down since its all-time high, trying to spin that as like meaning Nintendo is like, losing shareholder like enthusiasm and that people aren't happy with the console and the direction it's taking. That's not what it means at all. Right, and that's very obvious if you actually talk to actual Nintendo shareholders like myself, that Nintendo's doing very, very well for itself. I'm very, very happy with it, and these rises and falls are perfectly normal in this industry. Like, there's nothing really unusual about what's happening with this, but this is the kind of thing that like the industry is trying to rally behind to try and downplay Nintendo. And that's all this really amounts to, because you can't say that the Switch 2 isn't selling anymore. You can't say that like Mario Kart World is failing or it can't move units. You can't say that like Nintendo is failing or like all you can do now is just kind of like create this like narrative that like, well, the shareholders are unhappy. Like, okay, have they released a statement about that? Are they saying that to people? Like, is that like something that they actually say? No, it's entirely just analysts making things up and trying to like paint this image of Nintendo as this perpetually failing company. And that's kind of the issue with this, is that like, other company stock prices, especially like Ubisoft, are like going down as well, because of like, the season, because of like struggles in the gaming industry, because of like chip shortages and all that, these issues that everyone's pointing towards Nintendo specifically, and yet you don't really hear the same kind of stories about them. You don't really hear people talking about Ubisoft's stock going down. You don't really hear people talking about Take-Two stock going down. You don't really hear anybody like acknowledging the reality that like, what Nintendo is doing is like it's perfectly natural, that there's nothing really all that unusual about the stock prices, about this financial report, but so many people are really desperate to do so. Omniarch is a really good example. Like, he just uploaded a video like saying like, oh no, Nintendo lost 1 million annual players this year. They put it on their spreadsheet, and they're trying to downplay this because the text is bigger than like the last one. Like, it's like, hey, genius. Like, they just released a new console. Like, plenty of people have not played their Switch 1s this year and have not upgraded the Switch 2s yet. That's all this is. And it's just such a giant cope for him to say this. Like, it's such a giant cope for him to push this narrative. And, like, I really have to wonder, like, at what point, like, they just run out of copes. Like they're already reaching for straws, like complaining about the stock market and complaining about like American sales numbers. And we know now that the Switch 2 did very well over the holiday, completely debunking one of their big claims. Like, what are they going to do next? Like, they can't keep, like, hinging all their bets on, like, the Switch 2 has no games, because that isn't true. It never was true. It never will be true. Like, they can't keep doing this. And we're getting to the point where people are starting to, like, get really uppity about, say, people complaining about Nintendo Switch 2 editions, or people complaining about third-party games or ports or like NSO games. Like, Nintendo fans are getting really tired of seeing people act as if it's unreasonable to pay like a $20 like upgrade fee for Super Mario Bros. Wonder. Like, I'm getting very tired of seeing Angry Joe try and tell you that like Mario Kart World is $90. Okay, I'm really tired of people trying to shill like Sonic Racing Cross Worlds. Like, it needs to stop. Essentially, is my mindset on this at this point. Like that's kind of my mindset at this point, is that like I'm just very, very, very tired of seeing people spurg out about Nintendo, spurg out about the company, spurg out about these games and the hardware, and like just out of this like sense of desperation to keep the narrative going. And that's what we're seeing here, is that they are just desperate to keep up the facade that Nintendo's failing, that nobody cares about them, that nobody wants to play their games or cares about the brand at all. And it really is genuinely at its core like nothing more than a gigantic cope. Like, it is something that we really do have to call out and address as just being like a sign of just how out of touch the industry is, where they keep making statements like this, where they really believe that like a stock price drop of 10% is something to be concerned about, considering it, a couple of days before it rose 10%. Like it's like I didn't see anybody make articles when like it rose 10% and then dropped back down 10%, because this is like the nature of the market. It fluctuates near constantly. And what you're seeing is just the inability of the gaming YouTuber space to really understand that aspect of it all. They're constantly saying Nintendo's failing and they're constantly falling off, and the stock market proves it, and yet like somehow we didn't see any articles when Nintendo stock hit its all-time high in August. Like, it just didn't happen. Nobody talked about it. People didn't address it, because like why would gamers actually care about the stock market? All we care about is the games, right? So like, unless you're an active investor like myself, like you wouldn't be paying attention to the stock market at all. Like, to me, this is just a very good demonstration of just how corrupt and insane the industry actually is. Like, this really does need to be called out for what it is. That this is a very good example of just how desperate the industry is to keep up the facade that Nintendo is constantly failing.